So good morning and welcome to Mary McIntyre's house this time.
Hello.
And as always, she's made a cup of tea and you've got a coffee.
Coffee with the cats on the cup, obviously.
So Mary, we've done a collaboration, we've done some sketches, we've both done our own objects. Let's talk. So what's your background? What's your background in astronomy? What's your passion?
If it's in the sky, I love it, basically. So I've been into astronomy since I was a young child, but when I had the opportunity 10 years ago to do the astronomy GCSE, that kind of really ignited the serious astronomer in me. And I went on and did some qualifications with the Open University, and my job now is doing astronomy talks and freelance writing. So I do stuff for Yearbook of Astronomy, Sky at Night magazine, stuff like that. So
You're a professional astronomer, technically.
A keen amateur, I think I'd describe myself as. So what about you? When did you get into astronomy?
So it's one of those things I can't imagine there are people who are not interested in astronomy, if you know what I mean. In the sense that, for example, last night it was hazy, there was a bright full moon, it was then starting to fog over. And I was outside and I saw Jupiter, the Great Red Spot, 4 moons. I saw Saturn and the rings, the Andromeda Galaxy, a beautiful double star in Andromeda called Almach, and M15, the Globular Cluster. And it wasn't the best night, but I got my new binocular I got for my birthday, and I just had the best night ever. And I was thinking, why isn't everybody else outside looking up at this?
I'd take that over the telly any night. Definitely.
So, right, so we're sort of going to do a sketching session, and we've got our sketches that we've worked on. So we picked a couple of targets, didn't we? And we've got all our kit here. So let's talk through. So what did we go for first? Which one should we do first? Which one have you got there?
This one I've got is M11.
M11, the beautiful Messier cluster.
Yeah, the wild duck cluster, and no matter how much I look at this cluster, I cannot see a duck.
So do you know why it's called the wild duck cluster?
I do not know why it's called that.
Neither do I.
I think the problem is we look at photographs now, and photographs pick up way more than the eye will see. And these clusters were named visually, and visually when you look at something close up, I think it looks very different from the photograph. As we're going to see, because we've worked differently for this collab, haven't we?
Yeah, so I did mine at the eyepiece in my notebook, and you did yours.
I did mine from a photograph.
Beautiful.
So yeah, I did it from a photograph, and it was a photograph that we took ourselves in the garden. So it was taken with the 8-inch Ritchie Crescent, and it was daunting, to be honest, because there are so many stars in a cluster that's in the Milky Way, and trying to get them all in the right place is actually more challenging than doing it at the eyepiece, I think.
Oh, that is wonderful, isn't it? Look at that for a beautiful...
So yours looks more like a duck. You can kind of vaguely see a body and some wings, whereas mine is just stars.
So I was trying to work out the orientation, isn't it? Because you've got the one bright star in the middle, haven't we?
Ignore that, the paint pen blob. So that's not a bright star. That's
but I am just linking then. So I've got this little, which I use for reference. I've got 2 stars, and then it formed this sort of, I don't know, rhinoceros horn, which I think is 1, 2, 3, 4,
yes,
5.
I think it's there.
So yes, obviously we're mirror. I've got a diagonal in for the eyepiece. So that's what's happening there. So why don't you hold that up to the camera, and I'll hold it, and this is our very different sketches. So isn't that amazing? So you've done yours from your photograph. So how did you do that? You've obviously done it on black paper and a white pen, right?
I adore working on black paper. I do, if I work at the eyepiece, I very often do it on white like you have, and then invert it digitally. But for this one, I just wanted to do it on black, partly because I first of all mark everything out with a white pencil. The pastel pencils I really like, because you can sharpen them and get a nice point.
So I'm going to start taking notes of my own.
So my favourite brand are the Stabilo Carbonello. Not sponsored, but if they ever want to reach out and give me some free ones, I'd be very happy, because they're not cheap. But these just give me the best kind of payoff in terms of what shows up on the paper. So I'll use this to kind of mark things out originally. Once I've got the basic bright stars in, I go in with a Posca paint pen, because that doesn't rub off so easily, and just gently dab over that. And then once I've got the bright stars in place, I will go in with my pencil and do the fainter ones. Once I've got the entire star field in place, I then use a technique where you scrape the pastel pencil directly onto the page.
Or it makes all shavings.
Just a little tiny shavings, and use a fluffy brush and just blend.
Oh, just blend. Ah.
And that gives you that
Like a dust
background
painting.
nebulosity. And you can do that with a lead pencil as well. If you're doing a cluster that has star glow, you can just scrape the pencil and use a dry fluffy brush to just blend it. And depending on which direction you blend it in will give you a different finish.
Wow.
So I know that visually, when I've looked at this cluster, it has a really kind of distinctive square shape.
Right.
So I've kind of used a little bit of my memory of what the kind of background glow looked like in the cluster, and I added that from like my mental picture of it.
Gotcha.
So it's a bit of an artistic interpretation with that finishing touch.
Well, that's a beautiful sketch, isn't it?
So it's really nice.
And certainly at the eyepiece, you've got one really bright star in the middle. And have you got, so that must be that. There must be that one, I presume.
Yeah, it's kind of like a double star, isn't it?
Did it? Oh.
On the photograph, it looked like double. It could be the mount didn't track properly.
and then there's a whole load of stars that are just on that limit of resolution, just coming out sort of like a granular, like if someone sprinkled sugar. And you can just about see the crystals.
Well, that's another thing that I do as well. After I've blended, one thing, when you look at a photograph in particular, you quite often see what look like super faint ghost stars, because they're the ones that are just at the limit of what the camera can detect.
Okay.
If you carefully scrape your pastel pencil, then press your finger into it, the stars will not be exactly in the right place, but it gives that impression of the faint background stars. So if you look closely at this picture, but you can see that there are some really faint stars in the background, and I did that. Once you've pressed it once, you've got a stamp of it on your finger, and you can then
So it's
press
like stippling,
around.
isn't it?
It's stippling,
Yeah.
and it is artistic license, because those stars are not exactly in the right place.
I think if you were to do this, though, exactly in the right, I think you'd still be there now.
Yes.
Trying to do it.
There's a lot of stars there.
You've got to do, and there's things like the double cluster. I would never bother to sketch it. Yeah, I don't think it's physically possible.
It's daunting, isn't it? And I know even when Deep Sky Stacker, when I was stacking the photographs of this, it was detecting like over 1,000 stars.
Really? My goodness.
It's a lot.
So you couldn't be doing that for. So I got in my notes here. So I said the Milky Way was easy to see. So that's obviously a sign of a good clear night. It's warm. This is when we had that hot spell in early September when it was. Summer was here. All the kids had gone back to school. That's the best. When it's nice and warm. Kids, we had a rainy August, and then kids went back to school and the sun came out. I can't read what that says. And I had a tawny owl. There was a tawny owl going past in the video.
Oh, lovely.
So I could hear him, but I couldn't see him.
Because you had the owl with you when you sketched
the
dumbbell, didn't you?
Yeah,
Did you do them on the same night?
Yeah.
Okay.
So well, that's a good segue then. So a star cluster, I find star clusters, unless it's a bright open cluster and all the stars are easy to place. These, what's the other one? Is it Caroline's Rose up in Cassiopeia?
Yeah.
7789, if I say from memory, just to know his pop. 7789 I find really hard to sketch, because you've got this. There's just so many stars to accurately position it. I think we're about to have an intruder.
Oh yes, people on my channel will be very familiar with Evie.
So Evie is going to come and join us in a minute. So yes,
there's another object that we had a go at.
So you got the dumbbell there. Now you're. I'd be amazed if I could see it like that in the eyepiece. That is.
Yeah, I would.
But as a
as
drawer,
well.
that is absolutely beautiful. That is very much more like a photograph, isn't it? So how did you put that together?
Pretty much using the same technique. So I had a photograph that was taken. This is taken with the Forks telescope, so it's a 2-meter Ritchie-Chrétien telescope,
Wow,
which is why you can see so much colour and so much detail. I put in the stars first, because I've realised that if I try to freestyle the shape of the nebula first, it will end up distorted and then the stars won't fit on. So I put the bright stars on first to give me a kind of vague map, so that I knew where to bring these edges. Then all of this was done by scraping the pastel. The pencils did not touch the page. Stabilo Carpethello, scraping it with a scalpel and then using a brush. And I've made a time lapse of me creating all of these. Which
is that a paintbrush? Is that what you're saying?
A dry, fluffy paintbrush. So if you do the circular motions, it blends, like gives you just like a background transparent glow. But then for these sort of tendrils of structure, I just blend in a side-to-side motion. or just dab so that you get more of the colour staying on the page. And then you can just go in with the white, and then there's a kind of teal colour. And my husband always says teal is a duck, not a colour. But
yeah, I was going to say, what colour is teal?
It's a kind of turquoisey colour, and then there was the sort of reddish pink around the outside. And I can see from your picture, you can sort of see that apple core structure. It looks more like an apple core to me than the dumbbell.
Yes, so that's what I've written to you. Actually, yeah, beautiful twin load apple
core. Definitely. So yeah, that bit there, I think. Actually, I think that's the apple core bit, and then the rest is the outer shell.
And that bit's really faint. So that's the bit you see, this sort of figure of 8 in the middle, and then the fainter left and right, you can sort of see as a ghostly glow.
It's a very beautiful object. I've looked at it through our 10-inch Dobsonian, and it is stunning. Our Dobsonian isn't working properly at the moment, which is part of the reason I did these from photographs. It's very important. I know you've done a video on this, but getting your ergonomics right when you're sketching is so important, and I'm struggling with that at the moment. I need to make some adaptations for my binoculars.
So you're saying, talking of binoculars, another segue off, are you making a parallelogram?
Yes, I'm planning to. I was inspired by your video. I definitely need one because it's impossible to work without injuring your neck without one.
Definitely.
So that will help.
So we were saying as well, if you get a sun lounger, relax on the sun lounger, and you can look up overhead with it.
Oh yeah.
But then suddenly you'll wake up and it's 3 in the morning and it'll be really cold.
I foresee a lot of that over the winter once I've got my parallelogram out.
And you'll be snoring.
Yep. And my neighbours are used to me roaming the garden in the night. So how did you approach your one?
So this is done at the eyepiece. So I've got the telescope in the observatory.
Okay.
And what I do is I roll the roof back, take all the dust covers off, dew shield on, that sort of thing. I line up, and I generally give, I'd say, 15-20 minutes, let my eyes adjust to the dark. So I have no lights. I'm making your cat fall asleep. Look.
Yes.
Oh no, it's waking up now. My wife has a similar sort of look when I start talking about astronomy. So you've obviously got to have proper dark adaptation. You've got to let your eyes adjust to the night. So the camera, especially with a big telescope, can, how long was your exposure? I mean, multiple minutes?
Yeah, these were 3-minute exposures from memory.
So I can't stack an image on my eye for 3 minutes. But you can see the ghostly glow. And that's what I love about sort of visual astronomy, is I've seen it myself, as you've seen it with your telescope. And
there is a colour to it, isn't there? You can see a colour with this object if you let your eyes adapt.
Yeah.
I've definitely seen the blue, certainly, not so much the pink. But
interesting.
Yeah, with the Dobsonian, I've definitely seen that.
And it's quite cool because you think this is a star that's not much bigger than our sun, that's got to the end of its life, and it's puffed out this atmospheric, its stellar atmosphere. And I think you see that there, right in the middle of yours, is that white dwarf. And that's the core of the original sun. And that's just left behind.
Just left behind these lovely shells of gas.
And you think that's amazing. You're actually seeing a dying star with your own eyes. You know, there it is. It's above your heads. And this was the first, because it's so bright, this was the first planetary nebula discovered. But they're nothing to do with planets, are they? I mean,
no, it's a misleading name.
Yeah, it's more of a visual thing when they were surveying telescopes.
That central star is very handy when you're sketching because it gives you a starting point, doesn't it? Gives you somewhere to go out from.
So I wait for my eyes to get used to the dark, and 20 minutes, half an hour, whatever or so. And I'll start then with a propelling pencil, so it's always nice and sharp, the mechanical pencil. And then I'll start putting in the brighter stars. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'm mentally in my head think, well, that star's off at about whatever that is, sort of 10 o'clock, and slightly below that one and sort of half that distance is that star, and then this one's over here, you know, slightly further out, and we've got this one the same height over there. Now straight up from there in the middle, and you start by grids and angles, and just above, just below, you start putting this star pattern together. And like once you've got the framework, and I think, well, it's just between these two faint ones, but a bit below and across to there and above there, and you start smudging them in. And my lifesaver, sorting out this. So I've nicked one of my kids' stationery sets, and I get this. So I have an HB pencil, just an ordinary HB pencil, and a blending stump. So if I use a piece of scrap paper and I put a bit of pencil on the side, and then you can pick up and start
Do a really subtle.
building. Yeah. So you're not marking it directly with pencil, but you're sort of smudging it into place, and you can sort of start picking this up. And you think, well, this one's a bit brighter than the other, so I'll add a bit more in there to sort of build it up.
It's beautiful.
And then you can sort of smudge it out with your fingers and blend it in and build up the background.
And then scratch your face so you've got that black nose. You see, you can use cotton buds a little bit for this, and when I do sketching workshops with people, I usually take packs of cotton buds, and because I never throw the old ones away now, because you can always use them depending on what colours on the end. You can do that subtle glow with it if you don't want to do the paintbrush technique, and that is one of the best pieces of advice I can give anybody that is sketching. Your pencil doesn't have to draw it. You can scribble and, like you say, pick it up with a cotton bud or a blending stump, and that will give you the not a harsh line. It's such a subtle glow, and it's really good technique.
Yeah, and then as you say, you get graphite all over you as
Yeah.
you smudge it, and then you'll put your forearm in the original graphite part and then smudge it over as well.
Always.
So,
That's why it's great doing it in pencil, because you can rub it out.
So talking of that, then we both got one of these, haven't we? So I bought one of these sort of eraser shields, and I find that really useful with an eraser pencil. If I then decide I want to rub a specific thingamabob out, you can, and you got the same thing.
Yes, they only came the other day, and they're very, very flimsy. They're just from a random eBay seller, so
Just a thin
so
aluminium.
good. It was,
aluminum.
thanks to your video, I knew what they were called. I've wanted one for so long and didn't know what they were called, so looking forward to playing with those, because I do a lot of sketching at the eyepiece. I just didn't do it for this, and I think it's really interesting to look at the difference between the eyepiece sketches versus the sketch from photograph, and I think they're both valid. Yours are proper observations, mine are kind of more arty, but the techniques are still the same, and you can practice from photographs and then do it at the eyepiece, and it will work.
So that's a good idea, isn't it? Because when we've got cloudy nights, night after night after night, like we tend to have in the UK, you can then still practice your techniques and build them up. So when you do have a good clear night, there's no moon, there's no cloud, there's no fog, there's no dew.
That happens a lot in the UK, doesn't it?
That's 3 nights of the year. You're then, at least your sort of brain motor skills are switched on.
Yeah, I think the dark adaptation is really important. There was another object we were going to do, wasn't there? Which I have done from a photograph, but I tried to do this at the eyepiece, and boy, was it a hard object.
You did better than
to
me.
do.
I whisked out.
I don't blame you, because we were going to do the North America Nebula.
Look at that.
And I did this from somebody else's narrowband image. This is such a huge nebula, and it's really, really faint. And even trying to get any of it in the eyepiece and actually be visible was so difficult. So I wussed out and decided, come on, get down you. So I did this using that technique of the brush, just blending the pastel pencils with the brush. Did the stars first, but did it from a narrowband image, which is picking up structures that you can't see visually. So I'm not normally a fan of the Hubble palette, but this picture, the photograph I did this from, is one of my favourite that I've ever seen of this object.
Wow.
So I decided to do it, and I really, it's one of my favourite sketches that I've ever done, actually.
That's beautiful,
I'm really
isn't it?
pleased with it.
So when I've looked at this, and it's, if you hold that round the other way to the camera, so is that bit down there, trying to see where the pencil is so I don't touch it. So that bit down there is Central America and Mexico, isn't it? You got this bit is the, is it Gulf of Florida or whatever it's called?
I am hopeless at geography, so I don't actually know.
So I think from memory...
Is this the Cygnus Wall here?
That's the Cygnus Wall, isn't it? Yeah.
So this bit down here is the Cygnus Wall.
So I had to, when I was in Florida at the Winter Star Party, I did have to tell the people calling it the North American Nebula.
Yes, that's
and you
one
say,
of
no,
my
it doesn't
bugbears.
belong to North America. It looks like, so it's the North America Nebula.
Yes, it's one of my, gets my veins in my neck twitching when I see that online.
So yeah, so that's the bit I could see visually, but it is really low surface brightness, and it's huge. It fills the eyepiece. This is almost a binocular.
Yeah, you need a small
Wide
telescope
angle.
or binocular with a big field of view, and it needs to be very, very dark, and I suspect one of those filters that helps nebulae pop would be good. So I do want to do this at the eyepiece. I'm not going to be beat by it, but I just couldn't do it this time. I need to needed to change up how I was going to do it, but I really do. Very, very, very happy with this. And the background regions here, I did that thing again where you scrape the pencil and stamp it in with your finger to give those clusters of background stars, which is artistic license, because that's not the exact position of all of them, but I would be here for 10 years. There's no way you could get them all on.
I think you're absolutely right, isn't it? Because it's such a rich part of the Milky Way. But you have got, though, looking at your picture, these sort of dark dust lanes, because this area is full of dust, isn't it? Bright dust that's glowing to make the nebula, and then dark dust that's obscuring and blocking the view, isn't it?
When I first started to use this technique, I put too much pastel on the page and lost that, so I had to then go in with black pastels to pull that back. But I've now learned less is more. Do the minimal amount of pastel, blend it in, and then you can always add more. You can't take it away.
Yes.
So I've kind of learned, having done a few of these. If you saw my video of me when I sketched the Western Veil, I did a tutorial on that technique, and I put way too much pastel down. So the first layer was just way too much colour. So it's just been trial and error, learning what not to do. And it's fine to do it wrong. That you don't learn if you don't make mistakes.
That's true, isn't it?
There are many sketches I've done that I thought, oh, that wasn't so good.
But it's interesting, then you can see your improvements over time, can't you? So if you keep those, so never ever throw an observation away, you can just keep them coming.
There's value in every single sketch that you've done, and even if the sketch itself doesn't look perfect, you've learned the skills of observing in a way that will allow you to sketch, and that's important. Because it'll make you a better observer, even if you're not sketching.
Here she comes again.
Come on, you get down.
Little cameo appearance there. So that's very true, because when you look at, I mean, not that we're in any way I'm going to link myself to these sort of artists, but when you look at Michelangelo's notebooks or Leonardo da Vinci, you know, before they actually produce their masterpiece, their notebooks are full of practice sketches, aren't they? And they've got 30 or 40, you know, of what's the man in the circle and the square.
Oh, yeah.
And if you look through his old notebooks when I was studying this at school, you know, he's got 30 or 40 practice sketches to get the form right. And then it's then, right now, I've ironed out all the bugs, the brain, hand, pencil system is now working. And then you produce the final one. And it's by doing those practices and learning how the light and the shadows and all that all fits together.
It really does help you as an observer afterwards. Even if you've only tried to sketch something a couple of times, it will improve your observing, because it's so easy to think, oh yeah, that's the dumbbell, and now I'm going to go over here, and then I'm going to look there, and you haven't looked at it. And if you take a photograph of it, you'll process the picture and look at the photograph and think, oh yeah, it's a nice photo, but you won't have studied where the nebulosity is and the structure of it. And I think since I first started sketching, I started sketching because I'd become obsessed with photography, and I hadn't looked in an eyepiece for a year, and I was like, oh my god, this is not what astronomy is about. We're supposed to be observing. So my first sketches are Jupiter, and they're not even round. They're just the crudest sketches. But I love them because that was where I started, and it turned me into a better observational astronomer.
Brilliant, brilliant. So I can remember talking to a chap called Owen Brazell. Don't know if you know him. So Owen sometimes comes down to us when we observe on Sorcery Plane, get away from all the dark skies. And he said to me, he said, just instead of taking 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever, he said, just take half an hour one night to just look. And I was looking at M33, and I had my little 8.5 inch, my first sort of big telescope. And I was sketching away, and I thought, that's odd, there's this sort of bright, you could just about make out the spiral arms. And I thought, that's odd, there's this bright, sort of looks like a globular cluster in the field of view. And it was a star cloud, one of these dense star clouds, but it was actually in the galaxy, how many million light years away. And I hadn't noticed it until I got the pencil and paper and started doing the sketch, because it was only a little bit bigger than the star, but it was slightly granular.
You wouldn't have noticed it on a photograph probably either.
Yeah. But now, whenever I go out, I always look for it and I go, oh, there it is, because I stumbled across it. I was 200 years late to claim the discovery, but it was my own independent discovery.
But I think, like you said, the important thing as well is to be fully dark adapted. But if you look at the same object for 20 minutes, you start to see things there that you didn't see at the beginning.
That's
as
true,
well. Your eyes settle into it, you get used to the averted vision things, and things will just pop. And it's so easy to be tempted to just like do a Messier marathon and not look properly.
Just tick them off, train spotting,
yeah.
tick, tick, stamp collecting. And
you won't remember those. I bet you couldn't draw them from memory or even guess at the structure of everything if you've gone that fast through the objects.
So it's a bit like when you go to an art gallery, isn't it? And if you rush around and see 100 pictures in a day, you'll forget them. But if you study 3 or 4, take your time, then you'll get much more out of it.
Study the brush strokes. And I think it's really fun as well to sketch the same objects more than once. I love to do them on black paper, but I also love drawing on white paper. So sometimes I'll do the same object from an eyepiece sketch and a photograph, and sometimes on white paper, sometimes on black, and you're using different techniques and you'll pick up different things doing that, and it's an excuse to just keep drawing stuff.
It is, isn't it? And what's quite good, that's a good point about memory, because I flip back through my notebook and I remember things that I would otherwise forget. So, you know, going out and observing, you know, what's this sort of Virgo galaxies, but this is when we were in lockdown earlier this year. And so instead of meeting up to observe, of course, and be outside with other people, we weren't allowed to do that. So we used to set up a Zoom, and I used to have that on. I'd turn the screen off but leave the microphone, and we would be chatting with different people in different telescopes in the astronomy club, different observatories, and one chap's measuring exoplanets and someone's looking at the planets and I was visually observing these galaxies. But you know, we were chattering away and I'd forget that if I didn't write it down, because they'd all merge into one. So there's M51.
And I love your observations of like the owls and stuff like that as well, because there have been many times I've been out and a hedgehog's been snuffling around my feet, and you know, and you'll hear a fox that, you know, can be quite daunting if you're in a field by yourself and you hear a fox. You're kind of like, oh, it sounds a bit scary. And deer as well.
The sound of someone being murdered in the next field.
Yeah, one sounded like it was trapped in a barn. It sounded like a donkey being tortured, and I was like, oh my goodness! I was in a field and like a mile outside of the village, and I was like, I'm going home now. So, and I have deer crunching branches in the copse and stuff, and it's really good to actually record that as well, because
I think when you're outside observing, aren't you? You're observing nature around you, and it's all part of that wonderful universe we live in.
Definitely. I wish I could take pictures of the bats that are around at twilight as well.
Wonderful.
They're fantastic.
And they're eating all the mosquitoes, so that's got to be a good thing.
Yes.
So how do you manage your dark adaptation then? You said that was important at the eyepiece. How do you make sure you're getting all that light through to your eyes?
Keep your phone off. Even when it's at minimum brightness, your phone is going to trash your dark adaptation. When I'm sketching, I use a clip-on LED light, and I took one for the team and ate a load of Quality Street orange creams and strawberry creams and just wrapped that around to just... This has two settings.
Quality Streets is going on my shopping list.
But the coloured, it mutes it down, and then flexible. The red film is too rigid, and this has two settings, and I always make sure the battery isn't fully charged. She is so determined. Come on, Brent. Come on. She just tries every angle possible. So I use this on the lowest. I'll go around and get her. I was
going to say, I might just tilt. When you do that, then let's just tilt the camera down. I'll show our gate crashing visitor,
Evie Bean. She is so ridiculous.
Right, biscuits are going to come a bit further. There we go.
There we go.
There she is.
Trying to steal the biscuits.
So we were talking about dark adaptation, weren't we? And you had your light. So you ate all your Quality Streets. Which is good to keep hydrated with a cup of tea.
The thing is, like, your light is red, but the LEDs are too bright, and even a red LED light will wreck your night vision. So wrapping anything around it to just make that more diffused is a really good idea.
So Quality Street. So I used a milk bottle.
Not as much fun as Quality Street, but
no.
It works really well.
But what I think I might, having just spoken to you while we were sorting the cameras out, I think I'm going to get a few more layers and just help diffuse that. But I do have this Skywatcher. I've had this for years. It's one of these things that seems to punch so well above its weight. You know, it's whatever, a tenner, 15 quid. But because it's dimmable, you can rotate.
That's so good.
Then you can make it bright and dim.
Because the LED red head torches are so incredibly bright that you're blind if you put them on. I mean, they're just too
I think
much.
they're designed for people who actually, you know, mountain biking or walking at night and stuff, aren't they?
But they're sold in astronomy wholesalers and they're too bright. So it doesn't matter what you use. Now, I jokingly say that you've got to eat Quality Street, but it can be anything that's going to just mute that down. And because you can clip it, you can angle this to not shine at your face but illuminate your page, and you can make it so that it's illuminating just the bit that you're working on, because if you keep it closer to the page you don't get as much kind of back glare either. So I usually have a clipboard with that on, and I don't have a fancy thing like you do, so I tie my pencils on a bit of string and tie them to the clipboard, so if I drop them they don't go on the floor.
Do you have your gloves on a piece of string through your sleeves?
Yeah.
So Mary was just mentioning that. So what I've not used to for years, I've literally just written in a notebook. You know, just hold a notebook and hold the torch in one hand, or flashlights.
Make
if you're
the
from
telescope
America.
Move along, and
yes, so if you're nudging as well. So
you
I
need
end
to
up
be an octopus.
and you end up running out of hands. So I think the idea of having a clip, something that you clip on, then is really useful, isn't it? Because
definitely
it does free up one hand. And the other thing I've got, and I didn't think about getting this until literally about 2 or 3 days ago. And this is an old pilot's knee board. So when you're flying, you would strap this onto your thigh. So when you'll get a different radio frequency or the weather, you can scribble it down and you can do your navigation calculations. But it's really useful because, of course, you've got your clipboard. And then I bought a couple of these, what do you call these metal things? They're for nurses, and engineers.
Okay.
So when you've got to hold, pens in your lapel and stuff. But then I can then hold.
They're so good. I'm going to order some of those.
So I'm going to make you spend a fortune. We've done this one video and you spent at least £8 now since we've spoken. So there you are. And then you can hold everything.
So good.
In the right place.
That's better than a bit of string. Definitely.
And then what happens, of course, it's dark and you've got your dim red light and you can't see, and you spend all your time, which pocket or which shelf have I put them on?
But I like your eraser as well. I haven't seen one of those. I need to buy one of those as well. So I normally cut the end off mine with a craft knife, then I've got a nice sharp point. But you can't keep that on your clipboard. So it's in my pocket, or I drop it on the floor and then it's wet and you don't, so
that's just
really
a pencil. It's like a propelling pencil. But for an eraser.
That's so good. There's stuff that you didn't even know existed. It's amazing.
And then with that eraser shield, and then what's the other one? So I always try and go for propelling pencils or ordinary pencils that have an eraser, a rubber at the end. The Americans will laugh at us if we say rubber, so we'll have to say eraser. So
eraser.
So we have a pencil eraser at the end. So you don't then have to faff around. Oh, I put that in the wrong place. I can just spin it around and do that. So. That's the other thing.
And choose one that actually has a nice soft eraser on the end, because some of the cheap pencils you buy, they're just like rigid and they don't rub out properly. I've got loads in the cupboard that are terrible. The erasers just don't work. So when you're buying them, I think it's good to just feel how soft the eraser is, because the rigid ones just make a mess.
I hadn't thought of that. I thought an eraser was an eraser.
No, some of them are really horrible. I guess they've been in the shop for 20 years and they've just gone too hard or something, I don't know. But I've got plenty that don't work.
So do you just use ordinary pencils, or do you use different types of pencils?
I use different weights of pencils. So I have this set which is going to last me my entire life. I tend to use the 2B most commonly, especially for lunar, because I love when I'm sketching the moon to get the harsh shadows. That's one of the things that I really love about lunar sketching. Trying to do that with an HB pencil means you're kind of scribbling away. So I use the 2B, and if necessary I might use a 4B pencil,
and that's
because
to get
it's
the dark
really
shadows.
soft, but it's quite dark. It blends a lot. The trouble is if you then put your hand in it, you put handprints all over your page, so I kind of do that as a last step. And I also use a tissue to cover part of the page if I'm going back and forth. I've learnt the hard way that you get pastel pencil or lead all over everything, including your face. So yeah, I'll use a mixture usually of HB, 2B and 4B. I've very occasionally gone darker, but it's a bit too blendable. It smudges everywhere and makes a bit of a mess. The H pencils are good for doing a sharp line if it's necessary, because they don't blend out very well because they're that much harder. So you can see I've hardly used those, whereas the B's have been sharpened down by about a third now.
Oh, I see.
But I've had these pencils for so long and there's still hardly any of them gone. I'm not particularly fussed about the brand of pencil that I use, as long as it's a graphite one I'm happy. I'm fussy about my pastels, but with these, if all you have at home is an HB pencil, you can make it work. You don't have to buy anything fancy.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And it's useful, so I've got 2 young girls, so I'm always nicking their art collection, but you've actually got to go and buy your own, haven't you?
I have such a huge art collection already that I'm fine. I'm good.
So how do you choose objects that you're interested in? That's another question I had for you. So what do you just find something that catches your eye, something that you notice in the sky? What makes you choose, I'm going to sketch this object over the 1,000 other objects that you could choose?
If it's the moon, I'll see a photograph that will have a really nice mountain shadow or a crater wall shadow, and I'll instantly be drawn to that. And just really, I love the harsh boundary on the moon because it doesn't have an atmosphere. The shadows are really dark, the highlights are really white. and that really excites me when I'm doing lunar. So I'll look at
very dramatic landscape.
It is.
Isn't it?
It's just so beautiful, and you get loads of pareidolia when you sketch it as well. And I did a sketch of a crater recently, and someone could see 8 different faces in it, and I hadn't noticed it.
What was that
amazing. Pareidolia. It's where the human brain sees patterns that aren't really there and generally assigns a human characteristic to it.
Okay.
So somebody was like, "Oh yeah, I can see a man with a checkered cravat." I was like, it's a lunar crater. And then I was like, oh yeah, I see what you mean. So these weird cross-hatching things were just these scarps in the crater wall, and somebody said that's a big grinning face with a checked cravat, and I was like, what? Long nose, eye, cravat, no, teeth, cravat down here. I was like, okay. I didn't see that when I was drawing it.
I think that's more of a Picasso, wasn't it? The
yes.
Guernica, isn't it?
Yeah, very strange. No, because I break it down in an abstract way. I don't look at the whole picture until I've finished. I break it down and do the white bit there and then that shadow there. And so I'll just see a lunar picture and it will make me go, I want to draw that. With nebulae, I like to try to draw at the eyepiece the stuff that's brighter and some of my favourite clusters. I love star clusters because although it can be daunting, I find them a bit easier to do than nebulae at the eyepiece.
Okay.
So I love sketching the sun as well. We've got a hydrogen alpha telescope, so using my coloured pastel pencils to do prominences. So yeah, use prominences and sunspots. I do those at the eyepiece as well. So if there's something interesting on the sun, I'll go for that.
That's amazing because the sun can change in 5 minutes, can't it? As these solar flares
within
build
HL
up.
for it, it's amazing. So I really love solar sketching too.
And you're watching that real time, aren't you? You're not watching it on the laptop or the monitor. You're actually seeing it.
You're actually seeing it in real time, and that's good. I do from photographs as well, but the sun I can sketch really quickly at the eyepiece. So I've got a
well, you have to,
practice.
don't you? If you're solar sketching, yes, at hydrogen alpha.
Definitely. So yeah, it's usually if it's doing things from a photograph, there'll just be something about the photograph, whether it's the colour scheme or the shapes that will just catch my eye, or favourite objects that I've imaged previously and I just want an artistic version of it. Like I've done the Crab Nebula, there's an acrylic painting on the wall up there. So yeah, I really enjoy doing that, but I've also done a pastel sketch of it as well, which is really different from the acrylic. And I love doing nebulae inspired art with fluid acrylics as well. So I just love anything art that is related to astronomy and space. So I do artistic stuff that isn't like an accurate representation of an object as well. So that makes you more creative, I think. It's good.
Yeah, understand the beauty and the magnificence of the object you're looking at. That's really interesting.
So yeah, it's I love it. I love art. I love astronomy. Being able to put the two together is epic.
Perfect, isn't it? Perfect. So I've been doing so you got the Messier list, the Messier catalogue.
I need to work my way through that.
Yep. And then the next observing challenge I'll give you then is the Herschel 400. So William Herschel was out in the day, scanning all these objects. And I think William Herschel himself, as well as discovering Uranus and moons of Saturn, he discovered 2,500 deep sky objects.
And Caroline did as well, didn't she?
Yeah, she discovered a whole load of comets, didn't she? Yeah. So obviously they were paid to be astronomers, so they had the time. So even from when people say astronomy in the UK is rubbish, if William Herschel can discover 2,500 objects, then it can't all be bad. But they've got an observing list of 400, so the best and brightest, and I say that's a relative term because these are not the best and brightest objects in the sky, but there's 400 objects. And it just I've been working on it for years, and there's stuff, of course, that's quite low down, so I find that quite hard to see. It's quite a challenge, isn't it?
And the seeing's terrible when you've got something low down, and if it's in a part of your sky that's really bad for light pollution as well, it's pretty bad.
But you do get, and I'm going to flip back again, Serendipitous discoveries. There it is. I didn't even know this existed the other day. This is NGC 5353, which is actually Hickson 68. There it is.
Okay.
Hickson 68. We had 4 galaxies all together in the same field of view, and I didn't know it. And it's just NGC 5353 that's in the on the list. And you swing the telescope over, and you think, hang on a second. There's other galaxies. Hold on. There's another one. And then it's when you're sketching, you think, oh my goodness. So you think, how many stars are in each galaxy? How many billion stars, and how many planets are around each star?
It's mind-blowing.
And it's these serendipitous discoveries. And I say, if you don't write them down, if you don't sketch them, if you just tick it and move on, you'll sort of forget what they look like.
It's just incredible when you look at these galaxy clusters. I mean, even the Andromeda galaxy is fairly big and bright, but it's 2.5 million light years away, and that light has travelled so far for us to capture it and put it on paper.
That's before humans existed, before Homo.
Yeah, it's amazing.
So good stuff.
Blows my mind. And if it doesn't blow your mind, you haven't understood it.
Yes. So what next then, Mary? So what's your next observing or sketching or art project?
I actually really want to get my ergonomics right first. I need to get the parallelogram mount, and I need to do just try and figure out a way of making my sketching setup a little more ergonomic, because I'm struggling with that at the moment. Once I've done that, I've got Steve Tonkin's binocular astronomy book, and I'm going to work my way through and see what I can see with my binoculars, and hopefully capture a lot of that on paper as well.
Well, that guy doesn't know about binoculars.
I know, and the binoculars I have, my big ones, are ones that he built from other pairs. They're the Franken binoculars.
Oh, the Franken binoculars, yes, I saw that.
They're amazing. I won them in a raffle, and it's just like the best. I hardly ever win raffles, but I'm glad that I won that one. So they're phenomenal.
So I can recommend to you then, on your Christmas list, is one of those Bino Bandits, one of those foam.
I've got one.
Have you got one? Brilliant.
They're fantastic. Honestly, they are game changing.
Yeah, it's one of those things. I thought, how did I not? And they make one for a single eyepiece as well, a Spot Bandit. They call that one.
Oh, do they? Okay. Because I used to just kind of do that thing where you cup your hands here, so you're blocking that way. But they're heavy binoculars, so it's hard to do that.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah. Oh, that's brilliant. Well, Mary, thank you so much for your time. It's been a real pleasure to, one, drink your tea and eat your cakes and meet your cat, but also just to chat about astronomy and just to enjoy, looking at the night sky and taking all these wonderful pictures. So thank you very much indeed, Mary. It's been a real pleasure.
So they're your children?
Yes.
So how many children have you got? Just
well, two that I know of.
Okay.
Yeah, I am recording on that one. So I might have to cut that bit out, but it might stay in.